In this video, I'm going to be dealing with the 1851 failed predictions of Ellen White on the return of Christ. In order for people to understand this failed prediction by Ellen White in 1851, we must travel back to the failed prediction of 1844. Seeing that the work was totally wrong, William Miller walked away from all these failed predictions and even to the point of admitting that his chart was wrong and apparently his interpretation was wrong as well. But this was not so with the early pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist. People like Joseph Bates, James White, and Ellen Gould, who would later become Ellen White, continued wondering what went wrong. Why didn't Jesus return on October 22nd of 1844 as they thought he would? Now, there have been people I've read articles where they have guessed at what happened to cause this failed prediction, especially between 1844 and 1851. But I dismissed their guesswork and went straight to the writings of the early pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventists to unravel this mystery for people so they can understand it. So what I'm getting ready to undertake now is to present the facts to show that indeed Ellen White did predict the return of Jesus Christ in 1851, along with James White and Joseph Bates. Now, again, remember, they're wondering what is going wrong here. So sometimes in either late 1845, but probably early 1846, O.R.L. Koser came up with what is called the sanctuary doctrine. Now, this isn't something complicated to understand. You just got to go back to the Day of Atonement to see what's going on. And here's what this sanctuary doctrine is. Koser assumed that there were two compartments in the heavenly sanctuary, one the holy place and the other in the most holy place. This was based on the wrong assumption that Daniel 8 dealt with the heavenly sanctuary when it didn't. Daniel chapter 8 is dealing with the earthly sanctuary in Jerusalem, not some heavenly sanctuary. And is also on the false assumption that Daniel chapter 8 deals with the Day of Atonement when it's dealing with the daily burnt offerings. So it was totally wrong to begin with. But anyway, he pictured two compartments in heaven. So what they're saying now is that in 1844, Jesus left the first compartment, which is the holy place, and moved into the second compartment, which is the most holy place. It gets a little complicated, but I can straighten it out for you. In the first compartment, when Jesus left that compartment, the holy place, which dealt with the forgiveness of sins, he entered into the second compartment, the most holy place, to begin the work of the saints. And because when Jesus left the first compartment, is where the Seventh-day Adventists held this shut door policy between 1844 and 1851. That once he left the first compartment, they're saying the door of mercy was shut when he entered the most holy place in the second compartment, and that no one from then on could be saved. So that is Koser's sanctuary doctrine. And by the way, later he came back and totally said he was wrong about his interpretation. He recanted of it and said it's not true. But once Ellen White had given her stamp of approval on it, the big failure of the Seventh-day Adventists is they cannot go back and change what Ellen White gave her stamp of approval on when she said that she saw that Koser was right and he had the greater light concerning these two compartments. But yet again, Koser came back later and said he was wrong, but it's too late for SDA to change it now because their prophet had already had a vision over a wrong interpretation. So how does this play out now with 1851? Joseph Bates enters the picture here. You see, they're still trying to figure out why Jesus hasn't come back, and is still apparently in the date-setting business. So what he does, he goes back to Leviticus 16 and to Leviticus 17:11, and he comes up with this theory that every time blood was sprinkled on the altar, that it represented a year. Blood was sprinkled on the altar 7 times, representing completeness. It didn't have anything to do with years. There's nothing totally in the Bible whatsoever about every sprinkle on the altar being a year. But that's what he surmised, is that every time the blood was sprinkled on the altar, that each sprinkling represented 7 years. So now they have a tarrying time that will last between 1844 and 1851. Now this calls for some understanding here that you have to go back through a lot of the writings to figure out. Remember now, they've already come up with their 7-year period. So now they're saying that Jesus is going to come back in 1851, something that Ellen White buys into and starts promoting herself. And Ellen White becomes part of this prediction with her full support of the return of Jesus in 1851. Now then, keep that in mind as I read a few statements by Ellen White, that you would have to know what she's talking about to understand she's talking about the return of Jesus in 1851. In April of 1850, in September of 1849, apparently there were some pestilences and some type of invasion of these insects in the New England states. And Ellen White, in Present Truth of September 1849, talks about these pestilences as being part of God's judgment, that his judgment is about to begin, he's moving forward, and that she took all of these as the signs that Jesus was getting ready to come back. And she talks about that in Present Truth again in September of 1849. Then in Present Truth in April of 1850, she begins talking about the shaking has commenced. And this is all couched in this Present Truth article of 1850, Volume 1, Number 9, that God is getting ready to begin his judgment now, and that the shaking has begun and the gathering time has come for God's people together, because Jesus is getting ready to come back, which led her then in late 1850 in the early writings of Ellen White, where she would say, get ready, what we've had years to learn, we've only got a few months now. Why only a few months in 1850? She said, we've had years to learn this, but others only have a few months now. Why? Because in late 1850, they would have only had a few months until 1851, when they were predicting Jesus Christ was indeed going to come back again. So it was primarily the work of Joseph Bates, James White, and Ellen White that brought about this prediction of the return of Jesus in 1851. And that is the events taking place then that led them to believe this. We've got to look at several things too, though. First of all, there are no two compartments in the heavenly sanctuary. They weren't even talking about the heavenly sanctuary in Daniel chapter 8. Again, like I said earlier, Crozier later recanted and said his interpretation was wrong. Second thing, there's absolutely nothing in the Bible at all about the sprinkling of blood being 7 years. Every time you sprinkle a drop of blood on the altar, it being 7 years. It just isn't there. There's nothing in the Bible whatsoever to support Bates' theory about the 7 years tarrying time, because every time you sprinkle blood on the altar, it represented 7 years. So what they've done is gone from bad to worse. They've gone from bad interpretations to worse interpretations. Had they backed up to Daniel 8:14 and saw that they had it wrong to begin with, none of this would ever have come about. So now you have from their own writings how it took place, and how once again Ellen White and early pioneers of Seventh-day Adventists got into the date-setting business based upon misinterpretation of Scripture, and nothing more than the cover for an embarrassment that they had, and their pride would not allow them to say they were wrong. Until next time, this has been Golly saying, God bless.